This conference will now be recorded.
So today is going to be my last official cover crop innovators webinar. As many of you know, that Lessiter Media has purchased all the webinars I've done, which is around 150. So it's an incredible run here for the last 3 or so years. I've greatly enjoyed it. But as things come about, new opportunities show up. I'm more involved with hemp now, as some of you know, and I just thought it would be a good company to hand this over. So they're working at excuse me, at coming up with some new topics and so forth that I think you're going to enjoy. So today's topic here is applying cover crop and soil health strategies to wildlife food plots. And you may think this is a little bit of a divergent, but it's interesting. A lot of farmers are interested in wildlife and wildlife food plots, and there's a lot of overlap. And so we're going to hear from Jason Snavely here in a second on that. But I want to tell you a little story about this picture of this beautiful buck there. So back in around 2002 or maybe 2003, I had started the tillage radish in 2001, and I noticed that the deer seemed to like them in my fields. And I have a sister and brother-in-law who live in southern tier New York State, and they're really big into hunting and food plots. And I said, we ought to try some of these up there and see how they go, see what happens. So with the first year we planted them, they really it was kind of confirmed that the deer really liked them. And even as the went through the winter, they're kind of in the western edge of the snow belt up there. And when the radishes were fairly well protected over winter because they're covered with snow most of the time and not exposed to below zero temperatures, so they were somewhat protected. And then in the spring, when deer are hungry and so forth, the deer were actually pulling them up and eating the tubers that were sticking up out of the ground. And so some of you that are in the food plot business probably know of a kind of a legend in the industry, Mr. Charles Alsheimer, who happens to live only less than an hour away from my sister and brother-in-law's farm, and they got to know them before. So he told Charles to come down. You got to see these radishes. And for me, I'm a hunter, but I'm not generally not planting food plots. I just, I see enough deer around here that I don't, haven't put the time into making food plots and so forth. But Charlie really got interested in this, and then I met Charlie for the first time. I'd heard about him, but I met him because of this. And then I gave him a bag of tillage radish seeds. And so this picture here is some of Charlie Alsheimer's deer that he had. And that's how you get these beautiful pictures here. So he planted them, and he was really excited about them. He kept coming back to the farm and also using these. So that's kind of got me interested in this. And then there was some other cover crops like Persian clover, for instance, we saw the deer really liked. And if you look, well, I guess you can't see it in this picture here, but sun hemp was another one over the summer that the deer seemed to like. So some of these species were really attractive, like the same ones we used for cover crops. So I just wanted to let you know that. Now, that's kind of my introduction here. I'm going to switch over to Jason here, but just because I was a little uncertain if I could switch back or not, I wanted to put a little plug in for my book that I have written, The Future Proof Farm. This has to do with everything that I have talked about on this innovator group here. It's going to be coming out this summer, and it's just been a fun thing to do. It's a fun to see the reality of this come to be. So the future proof farm is where I see the future of agriculture going, where I see farmers are growing more nutrient dense food and also utilizing cover crops and no tillage soil health principles to create a better food product, whatever that is, even if it's corn that's going to be fed to animals that'll eventually be utilized by consumers. Consumers are asking for this, they're wanting it, and so for the farmer, for the consumers, and for the environmental aspects that this has. That's where we're headed in agriculture for that. So you'll be probably hearing more about this. I know that Lessiter is going to promote it. A lot of support. You can see some of the testimonials there. I guess Jason, I should have put yours in here. I didn't think of that, but anyway, this is just where it's at for me right now. I'm going to put a lot of effort into promoting the book and follow up speaking engagements and so forth. So I just wanted to get that in there right away because I want to close out here with Jason. So Jason, we're going to attempt to make you a presenter, and let's see if you can get your screen up on here. Pardon our little bit of technical difficulties, you might say here, not difficulties, but yeah, it looks promising. Gonna make sure you're unmuted too. So Jason, if you could expand that, I think we'd be ready to go. Yep.
All
Are
right,
you on
Steve.
now, Jason? Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm
It
on.
looks good. You take it away.
Outstanding. First of all, I've got this high-tech mic. Does it sound okay?
It sounds great.
All right, I robbed my podcasting mic. I wanted everyone to be able to hear me.
You make
Well,
me jealous. I don't have a podcasting mic.
well, thanks for having me. This is super exciting. I first of all, I want to apologize. Steve, you said to have about 15 slides, and anybody who knows me knows I like to talk about this stuff. So I've got a few more than 15. So if it seems like I'm going fast at times, it's because I want to get through all these. And a lot of them are really just photographs because, pictures really do tell the story of how far we've come and through this paradigm shift of food plotting. So it's really neat. I'm a wildlife biologist. I'm a consultant. Have been doing so for 20 years and started the Drop-Tine seed company here about 8 years ago. And everything that we have learned, ironically, from a farming agricultural standpoint, has come from primarily conventional farmers. So while this whole regenerative mindset shift is occurring, we're sort of along for the ride as well because our teachers are at this point changing the beliefs and the products and the techniques. So the food plotting, we've come a long way. I hope this little somewhat of a presentation shows how far we have come. And I do want to say that modern food plotting really began in the 1930s. I know around the 80s it got pretty heated as far as who had the first clover specifically bred for deer and who's had more protein, and that's kind of when the commercial side of things opened up and competition is great. But I will say, speaking for the deer, and a lot of times I bring up deer, I shouldn't just refer to the deer, although that's primarily what we work with, all wildlife species, whether it's game species or non-game species. But from the deer's perspective, or from the herbivore's perspective, if you will, the commercial side of food plotting really hasn't evolved in the last 90 years. And I think we are challenging that, and I think we're sort of pushing the paradigm on that. So, obviously the food plot and ag industries have favored practices and plants that focus primarily on yield while sacrificing phytochemical richness, nutrient density, taste, and the synergies gained from these diverse cocktail mixes that we are now planting, that all of you ag experts refer to as cover crops. So, I firmly believe, and those sort of following along, that following Fred Provenza's work, who I've gotten to know very well and have a lot of admiration and respect for, that white-tailed deer and all wildlife critters, they possess this nutritional wisdom. In other words, they know what tastes better. They know, based on flavor feedback and other mechanisms, which plants have higher nutrient densities and better nutrient profiles. They know all about secondary compounds when we don't. And quite frankly, they also know how to medicate themselves without us doing that. And a lot of this also conveys over to domestic livestock as well. So sort of my intro there, and then I will get started with the slides. As you can see, that that picture there was about 2 or 3 growing seasons ago. That's after we have come a very, very long way. So I'll go through the journey here. You know, these initial slides really just sort of tell the story that, hey, listen, you know, we were successful. We were doing things, you know, differently with the monocultures, and it was working. You know, modern agriculture can say the same thing. You know, as we chase yields and ignore soil health, we focus on running grain over the scale and making money. And you know, things seem to be working until you look a little bit deeper and dig deeper into the soil. So we were successful. You know, at 6 and 7 years old, my kids, both my son and daughter, started shooting really nice Pennsylvania bucks. It's only 100 acres that we have here. You'll notice there was a monoculture brassica field in that first plot, much like your shot from Charlie there. And then this one here was a monoculture soybean. So again, we're getting it done, but in a consistent manner, you know, with the kids, which was my goal. But at some point, we start to realize that even chasing yield and, you know, chasing the protein and the genetically improved products just didn't make sense after a while. So, you know, we got into frost seeding, again, sort of adapted and stole that technology, came out with a product called Arctic Bloom. Actually, Chris McCracken is listening. Chris helped me develop this particular blend. I'm super proud of it. It does very well. But that picture that you see right there with the soil completely naked and bare and revealed is something that you will never see on my farm and my clients' farms again. So again, we're doing things right. Heavy monoculture use, however, and yes, this is actually a hunting club here in Pennsylvania. We planted forage soybeans and they had such a high deer density that we actually high fenced, reversible fenced the deer out so that we could grow the forage and then open the two 12-foot gates on either end and allow them to come in. And then we got sort of high tech here and finally realized that the right design of electricity could actually work and do the same thing, keep the deer out. And this issue here, you know the monoculture again, that even one thing we've learned over the years is that even the greatest forage soybeans or the greatest monoculture, when planted alone, fails to meet all of the nourishing needs of white-tailed deer and other wildlife species, and that's both on a cellular and an organic or an organ system level. And in fact, one thing we started to learn was too much of a good thing actually introduces toxicities and forces our deer to go forage in different locations. So I know we don't have a lot of time here, but we were chasing individual bucks on 100 acres. And, my 6 and 7 and 8 year old kids and I were passing up 4 and 5 year old bucks in a state like Pennsylvania, where the land ownership patterns really don't suggest that that's a successful technique. But we had specific bucks in mind. And when we noticed that these specific bucks still traveled to what we considered poor habitats, even when we gave them an abundance of tonnage and yield of high quality forage soybeans and corn and alfalfa, they still took off. And again, I put GMO crops, insecticides, herbicides, and synthetics across the bottom there. That was our pretty much our program at the time. So just wanted to show these real quick. At the time, this makes me sick now to see this as I walk, run, drive through the country. Again, bare naked dirt. You can see the soil actually leaving my farm. Looks like I'm sharing carbon and all the goodies with the neighbors here. High synthetic use. Those tractor tires are pretty clean right there. Obviously had a dry day, but these days you will see vegetation stuck on those tires, plants, not mud. But if that was a rainy day, you would see a lot of mud on the equipment. So again, that's all across the country that we practiced tillage, and obviously even when we produced a great crop like the crimson down in the bottom right, we plowed it in. That's Iowa in the upper right hand corner. All across the country in all states, conventional food plotting. Now again, I think a lot of people think food plotters really don't have a significant say or input here, because a lot of us are factually, working with 1 to 2 or maybe 5 acres at a time. But when you look at putting all of this this acreage together, I think we can have a fairly significant positive impact on soil health and just overall ecological health. So this was one of the last monoculture plots I planted. I thought it looked great, popped up in rows. Chris McCracken taught me how to use a drill. I was pretty proud of myself. But when you look at the fact that, you know, I had clients building me rock rakes and insisting that I keep dragging these rocks off the plot, it just doesn't work that way. You know, you can drag all these rocks off and get a good rain and you've got more rocks there. So, you know, this last monoculture plot of mine, I actually rolled out on my little buggy, and I looked at that and I just felt like something, as a biologist, not an agronomist or a farmer, a grower, I felt like something was wrong. It didn't look right. It didn't make sense. And that's when I started, you know, researching regen ag and talking to, you know, guys like Steve and Ray and Gabe Brown, Rick Haney, and of course, you know, David Brandt and Buzz Clute, and the list goes on and on. And, you know, we were also planting very, very good perennial plots, and, you know, obviously spraying them heavily to fight the grass war. And these plots looked great. And, but again, monocultures, too much of a good thing is not a good thing. So it wasn't until I got to know Dr. Rick Haney really, really well that I started to do some of my own in-field analyses. And this is actually a client's field, very, very popular for wildlife guys to have maybe a rim around the food plot of clover and then a brassica or a cool season plot of some sort, either in the interior or a half and half type situation. When I went to this client's property, I thought it was interesting how he had the runoff right down the middle of the two. And I just observed for a while and I thought, you know what, I'll just pull some soil and send this off to Rick in his lab. And sure enough, just the change, again, you see it's right next to one another. You're simply looking at management. The clover on the left side was cranking off a bunch more CO2, which meant there was more biology, more active in the soil. Obviously, it's a perennial, so we had a long-term, you know, root system in the ground. And the brassicas, obviously, we're robbing the soil of the health component. Brassica mycorrhizal. I do Charlie Ulster, Steve here, but for, you know, our fall plots looked exactly like that. We had a little bit of diversity sometimes in that we added some cereals or we added some, you know, different brassicas, but still the brassica plots, while I'll agree, will attract and kill a lot of deer. They're non-mycorrhizal and they're very much robbing to the soil health. So it wasn't until I really got dirty and realized this that we started to ask the question, can we still attract and harvest just as many deer, wildlife, but also have a positive impact on soil health? And I was very excited to find clients were really receptive to this. I mean, all across the country, all across the White Hills Range, they were open to this. And while some said, listen, I'm not willing to sacrifice the level of attraction, but yeah, let's do some research and find out. Others basically said, hey, I'm paying you to help me. Let's go full bore. Joe Schweitzer's on here. He's one of them who says, I'm going to do all in. We're not going to wean off synthetics. We're going to go all in. So this slide right here, I actually made this with my smartphone. It means a lot to me because it was the first time I really got in the field and figured out that we need to do something different. So just like, you know, a lot of the agriculture industry this you know, nowadays, we wanted to go to no-till. We wanted to get into higher diversity. Obviously, we wanted to eliminate synthetics. We're not spending nearly as much as the ag world, but hey, you know, to a guy who's got a 3-acre food plot, $800 or $600 is a fairly significant amount of money, you know, in fertilizers and bug in a jug and all the synthetics that, you know, that are commonly marketed. And then, of course, with the diverse crop rotations and following carbon nitrogen ratios, all of that came into play. And everybody at this point knows the soil health principles. We wanted to incorporate those as well. So I knew immediately that it was going to be all about studying the dirt. And I had soil science classes as a biologist, and we would get docked points for calling it dirt. It was supposed to be called soil. I would argue with that professor now, if he's still alive, that it really is dirt. Most of us are dealing in dirt. If there's no life in it, it's geology. It's maybe a little bit of chemistry, but it's dirt. If there's biology in the soil, okay, now we're talking soil. So I started to get to know Rick and his wife Liz Haney, and try to figure out what's going on. And that top, there's so much here to go over, but that top test, those results came back. We were able to grow 100 bushel corn for wildlife, which is plenty, by the way, even 150 bushel as that reads, with zero inputs. And that was simply because of our management prior to that particular plot. We have some heavy legumes, roller crimped them down, and we also had some diverse, extremely diverse warm season crops in. And you can see we ended up with able to produce 150 bushel corn with no inputs. And then, that lower, where that red circle is, we really started to focus on the 1-day CO2, which again is in the biology giving off CO2 is a function. It's really the only soil health parameter we have at this point, right? Everything else fails to consider the biology in the soil. And obviously the more carbon we can pump in the soil, the better. That tells us how good we're doing at maintaining plants in the soil. So we relied heavily on the Haney soil tests and have done very, very well doing so. So we got into the no-till. You see my drill there, very clean. Obviously, that was the start. I had drug some rocks off. And then what changed the game for me is the roller crimper. Our fields don't look anything like that at this point, but the roller crimper and the combination of the front mounted roller crimper with a quick hitch plate and the rear mounted no-till drill just made things absolutely fantastic. Now I will say none of this stuff is necessary. Like all tools, it certainly makes it easier, but there are guys out there who are doing this same management style without the fancy tools. So you can see our fields changed. You no longer see soil. There's much higher diversity. This is actually a crimp ahead. We call them crimp ahead blends that we plant ahead of either a warm season like soybeans or corn. So we're getting there. And then the diversity. When the diversity came into play, that's when things really shifted for us. The no-tilling was nice, but without the diversity, we just didn't get where we wanted to get. High plant diversity is extremely important for herbivores to, in my opinion, to demonstrate diet mixing and forage sequencing. These are all things I think we will hear about more as researchers get into this. And, food combinations, the grazers with sheep understand food combinations and forage sequencing and diet mixing. So I'm looking forward to all of that. We've sort of incorporated that to an extent, into our wildlife plots. So, I think when we get into the diversity here, we just said, you know what, let's really allow our individual animals, individual bucks or individual does with fawns to pick and choose plants, that vary in primary and secondary compounds. And, maybe their meals are based on exposing deer to complementary blends and diverse plantscapes. And we have really changed the game with this whole attitude and mindset. So this is a picture I just stuck in here actually while you guys were talking because I took it yesterday. This was a pollinator blend that I call Pollinator Preserve. Recently, the Quality Deer Management Association and some others have really been hammering on sort of this thought process, and they've informed me that white-tailed deer will not consume hairy vetch, and they won't, as a forage, they won't eat cereal rye, and the list goes on and on. Ironically, all of these species are in my blends. I will admit, I'd like to admit that I felt confident that whitetails would choose hairy vetch, but I quite frankly believed them ever since college that whitetails don't prefer it. So I stuck up a utilization cage myself. These species were included in this mix to attract beneficial pollinators and also really to improve soil health. And we know that when you improve soil health, you ultimately improve whitetail health overall. But this cage, as spring turned on here and the temperatures rose, these species were outside of this cage were non-existent. You couldn't find them. You can see plantain and of course clovers, crimson. There's hairy vetch outside now, but the hairy vetch inside is now flowering, and there's nothing even close to that outside that is flowering. So again, diverse plantscape. I think we're offering all these complementary nutrients, primary, secondary compounds. It's a different story. When you offer hairy vetch as a monoculture, first of all, it doesn't grow as well. Second of all, I wouldn't be surprised either if the deer don't eat it. So I found that slide very interesting. And there's a whole book there if you were to get out in that field and really dig. So working with Jake Blank, I'm still running, the original red roller crimper. I'm not, those who know me know I can't, my wife has to dress me. I can't match that good. So I like having a red crimper, blue tractor, and an orange drill. But we worked with Jake and made the Drop-Tine roller crimpers. Obviously, as large as you want. The common size for food plotters is in that 6 to 10 foot range. And then I think I bullied Jake enough to finally make the smaller crimper, the flip over model for the food plotters. And this unit weighs about 1,000 pounds, and that's without water. You can add water to it. So again, we're trying to sort of mold this larger ag regen thing into the food plotting world. Our seed beds look totally different now. Obviously, hairy vetch crimped down. There are some peas in there and probably some crimson scattered throughout. But you don't see dirt anymore. You don't see soil. The one on the left there, I was telling Steve last night, that's my pollinator preserve. That was a pollinator blend that just did fantastic all growing season. And I ran out of things to crimp, and I'm heavily addicted to roller crimping. And I kept threatening to crimp this particular plot, and my wife kept saying, "You better not crimp it. People love it when they come in. The kids were clipping flowers." Finally, one day I couldn't deal with it anymore. I had nothing else to crimp, so I crimped it, and I actually did drill some additional wildflowers into it. But you could see the amount of soil armor sitting on top of that soil was incredible. This here, yeah, we got into the crimp ahead blends, what I call them. Obviously, if we're going to plant corn, our crimp ahead blend is going to be primarily species that easily crimp terminate. Of course, the more diversity you add to a crimp terminate blend, the more difficult it gets from a timing perspective. But we haven't really run into a major issue. After all, we're doing this for wildlife. If some things pop up, we're really not that concerned. But this was actually a little bit heavier in the cereals, as you'll note. There are some legumes in there. They also could have sort of wandered off from somewhere else. But this was a crimp ahead of beans, meaning we had planned to put soybeans in. So we put this crimp ahead blend so we could crimp it and then drill beans right into it. I no longer drill monoculture beans. I've just found that the deer really don't prefer that. So I've got summer reload now that I drill into that instead. So speaking of the reload series, I'm going to go along through here pretty quickly. The reload series, Steve, you probably remember this. I got together with the David Branson, Steve Groffs, and Ray Archuleta, and Gabe, and Chris McCracken, and Rick Haney, all those guys, and said, all right, the typical food plotter doesn't want to chase a carbon nitrogen ratio. He doesn't understand most of these species. In fact, a lot of the seed suppliers kind of laughed at me when I said I needed plantain and safflower and flax. They thought that was a joke. They laughed at me, not with me. So I finally got together, as you'll see here, with Green Cover Seed, and Keith and Brian Burns worked with them as well. But we decided, we really need to reload. Reload kind of plays off the whole hunting industry. We need to reload, regenerate, restore these soils with annuals first and foremost, get these nutrients cycling. And the idea was to not use any synthetic herbicide or fertilizers at all. And in fact, no chemical pesticides at all. So The spring reload was sort of the start, 17 different species and varieties. These change constantly based on what I'm seeing in the field. And then obviously we came out with summer reload also that sort of matches the soil temps when you're planting. If you're planting now and it's 60, 65 degrees, you'll put summer reload in. Summer reload's 15 different species and varieties. We did add popcorn this year for those of us who like to drill it in, smaller seed. But you'll still find soybeans and cowpeas and sunflowers and the whole 9 yards. And the fall reload, since really fall is sort of our cash crop time, if you will, that's when we're hunting, that's when we're harvesting. We changed the paradigm on this and we said, okay, we firmly believe we can meet the soil quality demand and we can also still attract whitetails and carry over enough species into the following year so that our food plots the following spring don't look like basketball courts or parking lots, right? We want to cover those soils. So we decided that we better hit all of the major plant functional groups. And this is where I think the food plot industry has really failed miserably. And it's my hope that they'll follow along, but I'm not going to hold my breath. So the first major plant functional group obviously is legumes. I'll go through these rather quickly. This is not all of them. And again, we're changing them constantly, but those are the 4 major players most of the time. Then we come in with the cereals, which obviously serve as a grass in the soil. And then the brassicas, obviously, this is where sort of the rubber met the road, right? The average cover cropper wants very, very, less than 2%, less than 2 pounds, excuse me, of brassicas in his plot, right? They don't plant a lot of them. We played around with that and found we can push that a little bit. Obviously, we needed to attract whitetails. And then the broadleaves, which actually now are my favorites that we typically ignored in the fall before. And these are the soil builders: sunflower, buckwheat, golden flax, and chicory. And there are 2 or 3 additional that I just couldn't fit in there. But so you can see, again, the goal was to focus on the major functional groups, not necessarily focus on the way the food plotting industry, feels they need to market the greatest, highest protein, most genetically improved or advanced seed. And then we were so thrilled in working with the folks at Green Cover Seed that they did they do their soil health resource guide every year, and they did a little contest asking for photos of their products. And we sent this in from one of our growers, one of our food plotters, Daniel Collier, actually here in Pennsylvania. And they picked it for the cover. I didn't like it personally. I thought there was too much soil showing, but apparently that's what they liked about the picture. So we were pretty, the public expected 40 copies, and Steve might correct me, 3 or 4 different languages. And you could see Steve Groff down there. He's got an article. And I was fortunate also to have one in there about wildlife regen. So we were excited about that. Of all the pictures, I'm sure they received thousands and thousands of pictures. I think we did a pretty good job. This shot shows it without the cover of hitting the diversity, but still growing what deer really wanted from an attraction standpoint. And obviously we armored the soil, we hit them with diversity. We still produced what the hunters wanted. We still produced what the deer wanted. Of course, if you're really in touch there, you can see a lot of nipping going on back there on the clovers from the deer. And everybody wants the radish, or the radish. So we still have the radish. So with that, I know, Steve, I took a little bit longer than you wanted, but just again, want to thank everybody. I think platforms like this are really important for the food plot industry because if it's slow moving on the regen side in the ag world, it's really slow moving in the food plotting world.
Well, hey, thanks, Jason. You did an excellent job. So no, you didn't go over time. Appreciate it, everything. So time for questions now. What questions might you have or anything to add? Questions for Jason. Who would have a question that they're thinking about? Anybody? Or a comment? I'm going to start picking on a few of you, so get ready if nobody talks. Anybody? Have a question? Okay, Chris McCracken, your name was brought up. What did Jason miss, or what do you want to add to the I know you're involved with food plotting, so
Well, I
what do
was
you want
hoping,
to add?
I was really hoping to be fairly critical, but he did a really good. So I appreciate the fact that he's always been one that's looked outside the box
Yeah.
and does the right thing for his clients and and for the conservation of that itself.
Mhm.
So nice
Yeah.
job, Jason. I don't
Yeah,
have
and I'll
Thanks,
anything.
just
Chris. Chris is actually a mentor of mine, and I see that my check cleared for that comment, so I appreciate that, Chris.
okay. And I'll just say too that there is, as Jason indicated, there are very few wildlife consultants out there that are getting the soil health component. One of the things I'll just add, and I think Jason, I asked you before, Kent Kemmerer from Georgia is someone that we started selling actually tillage radishes to, and he was distributing them in the South. And he made a comment that just I'll never forget. He said, and you mentioned this at the very beginning, deer have an uncanny sense of how to find nutrition in plants. And I just, as soon as he said that, I thought, I get that. I never thought of it, but I thought that was interesting. And you described that here, so that was good. I would just say that any of you are interested
I'm
in.
listening to my internet, but it went by before I could.
Okay, you have a question, Lawrence?
I'm sorry, my wife hollered at me. I didn't realize I was
Oh,
unmuted here.
okay, that's okay. I understand. No problem. So anyway, if any of you are interested, I'm just going to say that Jason's a great guy to be involved with. Joe, you worked with this. You worked with Jason, Joe Schweitzer. Any comments from your
Yes,
experience?
I have
Go
a
ahead,
lot of
Joe.
comments.
Go ahead.
Uh, I've been with Jason for now. I think it's 5 or 6 years, right, Jason? We've gone to Ohio to the soils class last year, and what he has brought to our farm in general. And I'm a deer hunter, so it's not like I'm growing it for my profit. I do have a regular job. This is a hobby, as I say. My wife says it's a money making thing, but she's wrong there. Jason has been fantastic in his ideas, and again, that one gentleman, Chris, I think said thinks out of the box, which sometimes I don't do. I look down a straight narrow path, and when he comes up with these ideas, and we text a lot, and I try and do the things that he's telling me to do, and they are successful. This year is my third year going in with the cover crops, and the explosion that I've seen in the last 3 weeks with this fall reload that he put out last year that we drilled in is unbelievable. It's actually waist high on me, and I can't wait to get my soils up to temperature where I can plant into it. I'm just waiting for that day. But
Yeah.
he's a fantastic person and a very good friend of mine.
Good. So I guess a question for Jason and okay, Lloyd. You have a question, Lloyd, or a comment? Go ahead, Lloyd.
Yeah, I was just wondering if the food plot kind of helped your cash crop, where if you put a food plot in for the deer, if they would go there instead of going into your corn or soybean fields.
All right,
Absolutely.
Jason, what do you think?
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, sort of, playing off of Kent's comment there that deer have that uncanny ability. I think if we play to them, I do think that we can offer, these plantscapes that are diverse, that offer something that they need that they're not getting from the monoculture. Now, obviously, free range whitetails, they're engineered to move constantly, sort of like the bison did across the plains. As a prey species, they can't really remain in one location. So, can we keep them out of those, soybeans or string beans or corn plots? 100% of the time, absolutely not. But whitetails, again, playing off of Kent's comment, they don't have vaccines, they don't have doctors and dentists. So can you only just imagine living in nature especially if you fight like a buck, give birth to fawns. They have the ability to nourish their bodies, to medicate their bodies. I've seen them hit plantain all growing season so hard, and obviously the sheep folks tell us that plantain is a proven dewormer, chicory as well. So I think if we focus on the right species, absolutely 110%, I think we could pull off some pressure from the cash crops. Having said that, here we are planting these for deer, and we're scratching our heads trying to figure out how. I never thought I'd have to fence out a pollinator preserve blend to keep deer out of it, so that we could have flowers.
Jason, a couple points here that I thought about. This is pretty much a farmer-oriented audience. I think you might have tapped into some interest here. If we can, I guess you say, divert deer, keep their attention more to these plots rather than in our cash crops. And I've thought of pollinator plots that people ask, well, is it worthwhile planting pollinator plots? And I would say that, well, 30 feet along a woods or 50 feet along the woods, you never make money. You lose money if you're planting
Sure.
your cash crops next to the woods. So why not put your pollinator crops there? I'm thinking now the same thing can be said for wildlife food plots. And also to make this question more complex, can we do both? Can we do pollinator plots and deer plots somehow? Plan a strategy. Maybe you could touch on that a little bit. The thinking of how can we keep the deer out of our fields or keep them attracted? How can we provide pollinator plots? How can we do all this amazing things? Or is that asking too much to have a multi approach like that?
Well, I'll never say it's asking too much. I've got a new project in Central Texas where we're trying to do this with axis deer, and actually they're more interested in axis deer than white-tailed deer. So we're sort of playing off of the biology and the I guess you'd say the survival strategies. I can remember we first did some research here on the property in Columbia County, PA. Chris McCracken was actually my mentor and helped with that research. And when he set up the randomly replicated plots, we always had the edge effect, as you noted. So we tried to stay away from the edge. In this case, you would want to stay near the edge and play to their survival tactics, which is stay as close to the edge as possible when you're foraging in broad daylight, because if the human species or any other predator species happens along, you want to get to cover quickly. So that's why you see this, the edges of your cash crops getting annihilated. But yeah, I think this whole lesson for me, which came by accident, and planting this pollinator blend along the driveway, actually it's both along the edge of the woods and the driveway, was really just number one, because I got into planting naked seeds and got away from neonics. But number two, I wanted visitors to see flowers, and obviously the diversity in plant species and insect species that comes along with it. But I never, not in a million years, I wish I could own it, never thought that the deer would consume this so much. I had a beekeeper who was really pushing me to make this blend, and he said, can you count? Tell me how many different species and varieties. And I kept saying it really doesn't matter. It's hyper diverse. We actually took multiple packets, kits of wildflowers from Colorado and all over the place, and combined them. And then I added plantain and some clovers. And finally, I caved and I counted 59 different species and varieties. And we certainly weren't expecting 59 different things to grow. But I guess the point is hyper diversity. I think that the deer are finding the medicinal value, the secondary compounds, plenty of nutrients. And as everyone now knows, I hope everyone realizes, plants do better growing together in a cocktail mix, in a complementary fashion, than they do as monocultures. And so as far as keeping, it's ironic because white-tailed deer is the primary bill payer for me as a consultant, but then they actually become, as a keystone herbivore, they start to eat themselves out of house and home, and it's a real challenge. So if I told you it was 100% feasible, I'd be lying. We still use reversible fencing, and I was hoping we could get away from,
Mhm.
the electric fences, quite honestly, aren't that difficult to set up, but you could have a half a day involved if you have a good sized plot. But I guess my question to some of these folks, the Quality Deer Management Association, these other folks who feel like we should stick to corn and beans and alfalfa and clover, if deer didn't like these other species, these traditionally considered cover crop species,
Mhm.
why are we having to fence these plots off? And it certainly isn't an
Mhm.
availability issue. My neighbor's the largest farmer in my county. He's got plenty of soybeans, string beans, corn, alfalfa, you name it. So yeah.
Well, that's great. I guess I'll go back up to Aaron. Go ahead, Aaron. Chris McCracken, get ready to comment. Aaron, go ahead. Aaron, you want to say something? Are you there, Aaron? We're not hearing you. Okay, Chris, just follow up. I know you have your feet in both worlds here, the agriculture side, um,
Joe.
and and just
Yep.
maybe you want to take it a little step further.
Yeah. So some of the experience what you're just touching on there is a practice, and more farms each year of trying to keep and they like to have the wildlife habitat, but yet at the same token they want to be able to raise cash crop.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
we have more and more interest as a seed company, and I think we're helping developing some of that interest and having great success doing so and providing different mixes and things like that. Just as Jason was saying, using some diverse mixes to keep them out of the soybeans or out of the corn and things like that. Just as you're saying, it's actually becoming a fairly common practice in parts of Kentucky and Tennessee right now for some of our more southern people. And the University of Kentucky is even assisting us on doing some different research and so forth. But find mixtures that complement the growing. So say for instance, if you're using soybeans as your cash crop, having a type mix that comes on at different times of the year that the deer would actually focus their attention and receive their needs from that mix rather than going to the soybeans. And again, I'm having great success in doing so. So I think that's going to be an ongoing process, but I think the interest is growing, and these pollinator initiatives that are out there right now. That's where a lot of those mixes are actually being planted. And there's some great programs out there right now that a lot of the farming community is taking advantage of, obviously, whether it's soil conservation or different watersheds or, like I said, these pollinator initiatives to where they're able to utilize and actually see some of these benefits. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
potential out there with this type of stuff, and I think
Yeah.
I think we're scratching the surface.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I would just say this, that there could be farmers even on this call here that they're not even deer hunters, but if they could divert the deer away from their soybeans, I'm sure they're going to be real interested. So,
Steve,
so
I'll,
yeah.
I'll add,
Uh,
playing off
Go
of
ahead, Jason.
Chris's comment. Chris made a great comment there about the pollinator initiatives. What a lot of people don't
Mhm.
realize is these pollinator blends, pollinator insects, birds too, for that matter, the whole food web there, they benefit just as much from the non-flowering species as they do from a lot of the flowering species. So, and obviously clover is a staple for attracting deer. Does much better in these diverse mixes. But I think, I've watched some of the agricultural world sort of struggle with taking areas out to promote the pollinators. But I do think that you could probably piggyback those two major objectives and playing off of some of that research Chris is talking about, and having both pollinator strips and also drawing
Mhm.
deer to those strips, sort of a mutual uh, relationship there.
Hey, that's some fascinating, interesting things. when you talk about the pollinator thing is starting to become more and more accepted in the agriculture community. And I think the discussion here of the wildlife component hasn't been as much. So I'm glad you're doing that. Circle back to Aaron. I think you were trying to say something. Aaron from Nebraska. Did you
Can you
have
hear me
did you have
now?
another comment? Yeah, I got you clear, loud and clear.
Great.
Go ahead, Aaron.
So I was going to ask Jason if you've tried strategically placing your food plots to address other resource concerns. Here in Nebraska, we worked with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission to kind of pay for folks to plant some wildlife habitat of cover crops. And we're trying to use those as field borders, critical area treatments to address erosive areas and things like that to improve the soil health and address a concern for that crop field while providing wildlife habitat. And I just wondered how far into that you'd gotten with like contour strips or buffer strips or filter strips.
Yeah, absolutely. When I'm on a property, we're always looking for those areas. First of all, we're promoting no-till, which is most of my clients don't have a problem just buying a drill, but there are people out there who obviously don't have that equipment. But absolutely, we're always looking for those areas where we can address other resource concerns, and obviously trying to minimize the amount of either highly erodible land or buffer strips close to waterways. And putting those in, we typically hit them with the annuals for a year or two, and we've seen that benefit far greater than going to the perennial. I don't think most soils are ready for perennials these days, personally, but the annuals seem to prime the soils, prime the biology. So yeah, I work with clients all over the country, so obviously all the states have varying programs, and some participate, others just opt to do it on their own. But absolutely, we're always addressing other resource concerns. And the other neat thing that I see a lot of now is the apiary, the beekeepers. So that sort of plays into it as well. A lot of them want these pollinator strips in sort of some odd field corners or edges or roadside edges, to help promote obviously the honeybee.
Great question, Aaron. I have, I'm going to just ask, I'm going to open it up for one more question from our audience. Go ahead and turn your mic on. That way I'll see you're ready. But I have a question, Jason. What about pesky perennial weeds, dock, thistle? I'm sure milkweed you could probably tolerate because that has a kind of a use. But what about thistle? Thistle's great for some from birds and stuff like finches, but I don't want too much thistle seeds blowing around in my fields. So how do you manage those type of pesky perennial weeds?
Well, first of all, I don't think any of them are pesky. I don't think any of them are weeds. I think the only weed is if you were to put a mirror in the field, that's the only failed part of the ecosystem. A weed is nothing more
Okay.
than
Yep.
it's our failed, flawed management is what it is. So obviously cows love thistle. Cattle eat all that stuff. Deer, I still yet have seen them consume thistle. But when you look at it from a soil health perspective, I have two points to that question. Number one, if you're doing it right, and if you're managing it and you're ahead of the game, you don't have major infestation of those wild plants. You call them weeds, I call them wild plants. Thistle is actually one of the best. That thistle in your near your crop, I'm sure it's not in your crop fields now, but near it, I would argue that its root system is doing more to improve soil health than your domestic crops, which are shallow rooted and really just you've bred all the good out of them and focused on a couple of parameters. So when you manage, the second point is when you manage ahead of the game, and again, Joe Schweitzer mentioned the fall reload. A lot of people thought that I was just looking at soil health. Well, we were playing with that balance of we wanted to make sure we had enough species come back in a biennial standpoint so that we could get ahead of the weeds for the next year. If you're not, you've heard the saying, if you're planning to fail, you're failing to plan and all that stuff. So if you're not thinking ahead, you will end up with a massive amount of, and I wish I would have taken this picture. I saw it this morning. Actually, my beekeeper was there and he's been asking about these pollinator species, and he said, how do you keep how do you keep so much diversity without all of the same, whether it's mare's tail or pigweed or, you name it, the thistle. How come the farmer right across the hedgerow has to spray it, but you don't have it? And I took him for a walk to my apple trees.
Mhm.
And I said, these apple trees, I can only get my drill so close to it. So I'm not able to put plants in the ground to mimic thistle, ragweed, mare's tail, you name it. I'm not able to get smother crops and cover crops in the ground. And in a square right around the apple trees, you see plenty of thistle, you see mare's tail, you see ragweed, anything you could possibly want. So if you're not putting the species there, of course it's going to show up. That's just a sign of your failed management. Not to be too harsh, but I think farmers and food plotters need to change their mindset on blaming the soil, blaming the Roundup tolerance, blaming everybody but themselves. It's time we look in the mirror and realize that a weed is the ambulance worker, as Ray Archuleta says, of the soil. Its job is to scab the scar you just created, and obviously to put carbon in the ground and to cycle nutrients. So if you're not putting other plants there to do that, of course you'll have it.
Yes, that's great perspective, Jason. Nature will cover itself, and it will cover itself with something or what is maybe most needed. And sometimes we don't see, that whole dynamic, that aspect. And it's all about how you view it. We've been taught to kill things that we don't like. So I appreciate that perspective that you gave right there. Our time is about up. I just want to, one more time, is there any other question that's out there? Now's your chance to talk to Jason, or you see his email there and his website, droptineseed.com. Feel free to go over there and buy some seed from him. He'll make it easy for you. Good guy to work with. Any other question from anybody for today? Then we're going to wrap it up. Well, thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. This has been really
Yes,
good.
sir.
Bob,
Thanks for having me.
you have a question, Bob?
No, I was just wanted to thank you, Steve, and appreciate your time and stay in touch.
Absolutely, we will. Thank you, Bob, and all of you. I don't, really view this webinar as a saying goodbye type of a deal here, but it's more of see you later. It just won't be quite in this dynamic here like we've been, and so I appreciate, very much so all the support over the years. So thanks again, Jason, for being with us today, and all of you. And as I always say, and I'm going to end up the same way as before. Stay curious and keep learning. We'll see you around.